It is quite an honor to say that I have with me the man who is the former national Greco-Roman wrestling champion. He aspired to the heights of becoming a member of the United States Olympic wrestling team. Yes, and of course that's the man we all know as Bob Roop.
And Happy New Year! It's 2024 on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And of course, I am your co-host, Ray Russell, along for the ride. And this week on the show, lots of topics to discuss. We're going to go back to 1970 and the career of Bob, but we're also going to go back and look at Bob's encounters with the likes of Johnny Valentine, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Polish Power, Ivan Putski, the Spaceman, Frank Hickey, and so much more coming this week on the Wrestling Stoop. All of it, I promise you don't want to miss. But first, just a friendly reminder, guys, that you can listen to the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop, along with sister shows like the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF Project, and also our podcast, Regional Wrestling, where we talk the territories. Guaranteed 100% territory talk each and every time out there on the show, whether it's 1981 Georgia with Jamie Ward, 1986 in the UWF with guest Roman Gomez, or the 1985 Memphis Project with the likes of Steve Crawford and Gene Jackson. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Google, and beyond. And be sure to follow us on social media, guys. You can follow Bob. You can friend him over at Facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. I'm sure he'd love to have you as his Facebook friend. And you guys can follow me, Ray Russell, on X, formerly the Twitter. You can follow me there at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me at Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, guys, YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And last but certainly not least, now would be a fantastic time for you guys to become a WrestleCopia patron as we continue to grow. Right now, I'm talking to you guys about that $5 all-access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Yes, indeed, all sorts of gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes. I'm talking pages and pages of show notes, guys, for the Wrestling Memory Grenade, the Regional Wrestling Podcast, and Monday Warfare as well. You'll also get early access to many of the podcasts here on WrestleCopia, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. Plus, you'll get remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show covering the 1989 NWA Project. And that includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all. You also get digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, and of course, the Patreon-exclusive watch-along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that wasn't all, also you get random bonus video drops and other new goodies coming as well. And you get all of that for the low, low price of just $5. $5, guys. No subscription. Cancel anytime. Please show your support. Give it a try for a month. I think you'll like all the content that I offer, and every penny of it, every penny you give, goes right back here into funding the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. So please, if you can, help keep all of these wonderful shows up and running for the months and the years to come. And now with all of that out of the way, time to bring him in for the new year. Here he is one more time, Mr. Bob Roop. Bob, welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop.
Thank you, Ray. Good evening to you, and good evening to our listener out there.
Gotta say a happy New Year to you, Bob.
Well, same here, and happy New Year to out there to the wrestling world. I say good evening. You might be listening to this in the morning or in the middle of the night. Who knows? Well, right. Good day or good night might be a Might be the best way to put it. But anyway, glad you're listening.
Absolutely. Man, we have had so much feedback on the San Francisco shows, Bob. Mostly positive, a few detractors, which is expected. Some people just love Roy Shire, and that's okay. They're entitled to their opinion, as are you. So sure. I just wanted to get that out of the way at the top of the show, though. Great numbers on those shows. Everybody really enjoyed them. They were happy with the Ask Bob episode we did for the holidays as well. Hey, for those who have inquired, don't worry. Ask Bob 2 will be somewhere down the line. We will get into it again. In fact, some of the question you asked may be answered prior to that because some of them actually coincide with the stories we're going to tell in between time. So it'll all work out at the end. I do promise you guys that. But Bob, last week we go off air and we spend another 30 minutes talking. And we talk, you had a lot of great stories to share that unfortunately, we don't have here on the show, but I said I saved them all as far as in my memory banks go. So I said, you're going to tell each and every one of those stories on this show because the fans are going to love them. From Jay York to Johnny Valentine. And so this week, I guess since it's closer to the time frame here, I thought it would be cool if we kicked off the show talking about the legendary Johnny Valentine.
That'd be great because he was legendary, and I was booked against him very early in my career. And a guy who already, all the boys in the locker room will talk about other wrestlers. And a lot of times it's like they're trying to say, oh, I worked with so-and-so. And by, if you worked with a world champion, obviously you're a main event guy. You're a big leaguer. So guys were always like, you name dropping, like, yeah, I work with so-and-so. Very few of them had worked with Johnny Valentine, but all of them were talked about him because he had a style. Let's put it this way. Johnny was a guy that took a while to get over to where people really accepted him, but once he did, he stayed over. I mean, usually forever.
That's usually exactly how he's described by those in the know, those who were there. Yeah.
It took a while. Sometimes it took 4 or 5 months to get him over, but when he was over, and the reason why was because Johnny wasn't trying to get people to suspend their disbelief to believe that he was for real. He was trying to get them to believe he was real for real, that he really was out there, wrestling for real. And his style was very conducive to that. And his style was very simple. I had the benefit of having Eddie Graham. Eddie was trying to coach me and bring me along and teach me things, and he would tell me stuff. And he told me that Valentine, he had asked Johnny Valentine, was one of his peers during his era, and he had asked Johnny about why he did his methodology in the ring was very simple. He didn't do a lot of things. And Valentine told him that he watched himself on TV, and anything that he saw in his own performance that didn't look completely real and didn't look good, he didn't do it. So, as he got older and, the road and injuries and age, and you get where you can't do everything. So he would limit it to just a few things he could do that were believable. And it wasn't much. I mean, he didn't have to do a whole lot. And we'll get into it as we get a little further into the story. But, well, let me back up a little. He came in for a match with Jack Briscoe in Tampa.
You're talking in Florida. Okay, yeah, okay.
In Florida, and Johnny, Florida is the only place I ever was in a dressing room with him, or was around him.
Right.
Shortly after this, he was injured in a plane crash. He was paralyzed from the waist down. So, I don't know if I ever saw. I might have seen him again, but I don't think. He wasn't the kind of guy that. I'm sure he had his contemporaries, guys from his era, that might run up and say, "Hey, Johnny, JB, how you doing?" But he wouldn't met Mr. Warm and friendly, Mr. Cuddle Bear. So
I kind of sense that.
Yeah, if I saw him, I might have certainly said hello. But anyway, and when he was wrestling in Florida and Tampa, Eddie Graham asked me. It was after I had gone on earlier. He asked me to stick around and watch the match, and he went out there with Jack Briscoe, and Jack, was kind of not a white meat baby face, but yeah, kind of. Because he wasn't real big, and when I say white meat, he wasn't. Well, I'll give you an example. Dick the Bruiser, after being heel for so long, once in a while they would turn him babyface to go against a really nasty heel that they needed somebody really tough to go against.
Right.
So Bruiser would be the babyface. Well, he's not white meat. He's
no, definitely not.
He's like a meat chopper.
He's the other meat.
Yeah. So Jack was a typical good guy, and Jack weighed about, he only weighed about 210, 220 pounds, which is big for, our normal society, but not for wrestling. But, Jack used drop kicks, and they did a lot of action, and because he was nice looking, most heels didn't want to take him off his feet and have him down or have him put him in a headlock and take him over where you couldn't see him. You couldn't see his good looks. You'd work holes with him where most of certainly his face and his nice build was visible. That's it's show business. So you want to show someone who is admirable, is to look at. He's an athlete, nice looking guy, and all that. And plus, Jack was very expressive with his face, with selling, looking like he was being hurt, and he was very expressive. So if I had been working with him, I would have done some stuff in the beginning where I would try to take over on him and out wrestle him, but I would give him a chance to show his good stuff before I ever took over on him. I would have had him at least drop kick me once, or get me with a scoop slam or something. A couple of high spots coming off the ropes where he outthought me, and then I might take over on him for a while. But Johnny Valentine didn't do that, and there was no heat between them. I mean, they hadn't, as far as I knew, they hadn't wrestled before, certainly not in Tampa. And Johnny took over on him right away. He grabbed him, he pushed him in a corner, grabbed him in the front face lock and pulled him out in the center of the ring, and just pulled him down into where he's laying on top of him. Jack was like in a front face lock with his face down, laying on the surface of his body, and that's all you saw. Johnny kept him there for like 2 or 3 minutes. And after, people didn't get to see Jack do anything yet. So after, people didn't start yelling boring, but they were anticipating the normal routine of Jack, being able to do some of his flashy stuff. And finally, he worked his way up and back into a corner. Now, 5 minutes might have gone by this time. And they'd end up back in the corner, and the referee would make them break, of course. And Johnny would break clean, and then he grabbed Jack, and he hit him with a forearm, which is legal. He hit him with a big smashing forearm in the chest, grabbed him in the front face lock again, and dragged him back to the center of the ring and put him down again for another 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. Well, he did this for about 15 minutes. And by this time, when Jack got up to his feet and actually got to the point where he got the front face lock off from around his head and was standing upright and doing the standing wrist lock, where he's got, they're fighting for a position to see who can overpower the other in that top wrist lock. I mean, that was like they'd done some fantastic high spot where, running around, drop kicks and all that. The fans were getting with it. They were like, yeah, come on. But when Johnny snapped him back into the front face lock again, and put him back down on the mat, back down where they'd been for that like 12, 14 minutes already, he got some serious heat, and he hadn't done anything.
Right.
I mean, he hadn't fouled him. This went on for about 40 minutes, and the match, I think, was 42 minutes long. And so when at the end, when he made a comeback, I'm telling you, the place went, he got a big reaction because the people had been waiting for it for so long. And I'm convinced that at least some of them believed that what they were saying was real. Maybe all of them, but a lot of them certainly did, because they weren't doing anything that was expected. Of course.
So I'd heard that story in regards to Johnny Valentine and how he worked. It's basically exactly how you described it, that he would grab a hold and he would hold it, and the crowd would kind of just sit there for a while, but eventually he held it so long that it pissed the crowd off. You're verifying that with me, which is pretty cool, because there's not a lot. There's a little Johnny Valentine out there as far as, lengthy matches go. There's some squashes too, and believe me, Johnny knew he wasn't getting paid by the hour in those squashes, so there was no grabbing a hold there. It was an elbow to the back of the head, and this is over. But I think that's pretty cool to hear. That's what that's the way he worked with Jack Briscoe, and it did. Through your own words, it got over with the crowd there. So just another example, because I've heard that same exact story, not with Briscoe, but just Johnny's style in general. So I think that's kind of cool that you're basically verifying it here. That was something that he did do. I've heard that here in this territory. At one point, we had a wrestler here in the Cleveland territory named Johnny Powers, and he was essentially our Hulk Hogan, if you will, for years here. And anybody in their late 60s or 70s plus years old around here, they'll tell you he was the man. And his number one, the antithesis of Johnny Powers was Johnny Valentine. They were the main event in the Cleveland territory. So he did that quite a bit up here.
Yeah, I knew Johnny. I mean, I didn't know him well, but I met him in passing somewhere. Okay. Yeah, I heard he was a major player. But okay, so I'm booked with Johnny at the Bayfront St. Petersburg, and the main event is Jack Briscoe against Dory Funk Jr. And they had wrestled in Tampa, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 times. So I'm relatively green. I'm a couple years in the business, and as I said on an earlier program, it takes 10 years normally to learn the business. And I mean, I was, it was a quick study. In order to learn everything you need to know to be able to go anywhere in the world and protect yourself against what you might run into. I'm talking about if you're in Europe, you're in the Far East, you're in South Africa, you're in Australia, you're in New Zealand, wherever you are. Whatever you run into, you're prepared to, and I'm talking about not just in the ring, with the promotion. For example, I worked a month in Germany for a German promoter, and when it came time to pay me, he said he gave me a different figure for what he was going to pay me to what I'd been told before I started. I'd been getting a draw all along, but the main payoff was going to come after it was all over because they wanted to make sure you were going to stick around or you didn't get hurt or whatever, and you had to earn your money. Well, he was going to short me, and I had to know what to do. And fortunately, I did. I just told him, well, you can go ahead and do that, but I will tell everyone that I ever run to the rest of my career that you can't be trusted. You say one thing and then you do another. So if that's worth shorting me out at $500 or whatever, be my guest. But so of course he paid me. He made out like, oh, well, I was just kidding, of course. But you need to be able to know those things to be able to protect yourself. So I'm only a couple years in the business. In fact, I was kind of intimidated working with Johnny because, like I say, he's like this master, and I'm an apprentice basically. Mm-hmm. So there was a point in our match where it was out on the apron, and he was inside, and he would come to the ropes and like try to grab me, and he was telling me to punch him. Well, I hadn't developed the ability to punch yet. What I did was, if in the ring, if I had a guy, if I was going to punch him, I'd grab him by the hair or some way I could hold his head steady. I'd club him with my closed fist, but not with the knuckles, with the flat of my hand, but with it closed. I clubbed him on the side of the neck with it, and I would lay it in. I mean, I don't mean as hard as I could, but I didn't have the ability to throw a punch and just make it light, like the guy. And later on, I learned to, but I couldn't do it yet at that time, and I didn't want to look horrible, so I'd lay it in a little bit. Well, Johnny was coming, and he was telling me, he sent word to the referee that he came over to get me off the apron to punch him. And I didn't, like I say, he wasn't giving me time to reach out and grab him and hold him steady. So I think the first 5 times I punched him, I hit him in a different place every time. One of them was on the ear, one of them was on the temple, one of them was on the shoulder, one of them was on top of his head, I think, and one of them might have been on the jaw. And I mean, I hit him pretty hard. And he just, I mean, I was mortified. I felt terrible, but I mean, he kept coming. What are you going to do? I mean, I had to keep trying, and he wasn't ducking it. I just was, I was rearing back, holding on to the top rope and laying into it, like, when I was punching him, like trying to get him to back up. And eventually he backed up and let me get into the ring. So I don't remember exactly what we did. I mean, in the match, who won, but that's not important. But that match. They had a thing called the Golden Circle, and they had the ringside seats were $20, and I think you did a cost of living. Yeah. And that would be about $150 in today's money.
Yeah.
For a ringside seat.
For wrestling. Back in
for pro wrestling, yeah.
In 72.
There were people in the audience in evening dress. I'm talking about tuxedo coats.
Well, for that kind of front row seat back in those days, they probably rocked like that.
Well, it did. They said, well, wrestling, $20 for a seat? It must be something really spectacular. I mean, there's people that I call them money snobs, Well, if I have to pay this, if it costs as much to see it, it must be worth something. Anyway, after the show, Eddie Graham had a little after-match get together at his house, and Jack Briscoe and I were invited. And later on, I was married to my first wife at the time, and we were going to go to my place, and he had an assignation with a young girl named Sherry, who was Bobby Shane's assistant.
Miss Sherry, oh yeah.
Yeah, Miss Sherry, and she and Jack had struck up on a friendship, and so he was meeting her over there, and so we went to Eddie's place. Eddie asked us to come by. Jack had been in the main event, and I'd been in the most special match, but we've been in the last two matches, I think. I might have gone on third from this. It doesn't matter. Going on against Johnny, he was one of the major players on that card. So we go over there, and I had never met Johnny or talked to him before our match.
Before you hit him in the face, right?
Yeah, and the eye and the jaw and the shoulder. Might have hit him might have hit him in the butt for all I know. But the night he wrestled Jack, Johnny wasn't the kind that, he was sitting in the dressing room. He looked like he was contemplating murdering somebody, or that maybe he just been murdered.
He seemed to always have that face.
Yeah. He wasn't a guy you want to just walk up to and say, "Hey, how's it going?"
Right.
Hey. So I don't remember ever meeting him even. So before our match. So anyway, get over to Eddie Graham's place, and we're dressed up. I didn't have a sports coat on, but I had a nice shirt and dress clothes. And he came up to me and he said, "Hey, about in our match," he said, "Can I show you something about punching?" And I didn't want to, but what are you going to say? And now there's only about 10 people there, but they're all watching. So I'm sitting there and I'm bared, I'm ready. And he waffled me, I'm telling you, whop! He just smacked her. And he hit me right on the side of the neck. But I'm telling you, and I got, I wasn't drunk. I'd had a beer or two, but I was a perfect mark on that one because I got hot. I bristled up. I said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Here we are at this party. Eddie Graham's wife and any of the women there had on nice dresses, and
right.
It's like an affair.
Sure.
And here we are doing this boorish type crap right in the middle of this nice party, and just my sensibilities were. I'm not a snob or anything. I'm a middle class guy, but I just thought, he embarrassed me. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
So I got hot and I said, what do you think you're doing? And I wasn't going to punch him out or anything, but I was going to cuss, well, Eddie Graham, and I'm sure they all loved it. After I left, I'm sure they laughed their butt off, but, Eddie said, come on, Bob, and so anyway, we had, I calmed down. We had another beer or two, and then we left. Well, for some reason, Johnny wanted to come with us. I don't remember why. Maybe he didn't want to stick around with Eddie, and he was by himself, and that's probably it. We were going to a private party, and so it was a way for him not to have to just go back to his hotel or motel where we were staying. So he went with us, and I'm still hot. So we're at my apartment. We lived up on the second floor of this apartment complex, right across from the street from Harry Smith's gym in Tampa. And Harry Smith was a pro wrestler who also was a bodybuilder. He also ran a gym. He was a really good guy. He was very good to me. I've always got a lot of time for Harry, and he was an older wrestler by the time. He's still working time to time, but good guy. Anyway, so I was still hot about the punch at the embarrassing me. And by this time I've had a few beers, and so we're up on that second floor, and now there's a balcony. And, on the right, I turned to where I was facing Johnny. To my right is the building, my apartment, and we're like one apartment down from my place, and the other place was the folks were gone, so there was nobody. We weren't going to be bothering anybody in the next apartment. On my left, which would be Johnny's right, was the balcony. The balcony ledge was about, I don't know, 3 feet high. Came up to about your hip, or maybe waist. And so, say we punched each other. If Johnny punched me and knocked me out, I might fall against the building and slump down on the floor. If I knocked him out, he might go over that balcony and land on the concrete below.
Yeah.
So I turned around and I said, would you mind showing me that punch again? And he knew what was happening. He got a smile on his face because he was weird. Let's put it that way.
I've heard he's a sadist, man.
Yes. He said, yeah. I said, yeah, show me that again. And I said, you first. And we punched each other at least 20 times. Jesus. And I mean, I was laying it in as hard as I could lay it in. And I wobbled him. I saw his eyes crossed a couple times. I mean, I didn't hit him this time I hit him on the neck. I mean, the side of the neck. But I mean, I was 280 pounds. The Olympics were about a year, only a couple of years back.
Sure.
So I was working out at the gym too. So I laid him. He was laying him in. I mean, he was waffling me too. And finally, after, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 exchanges, he said, I think you got it down. And so we went into my apartment, and I don't remember what happened the rest of the evening. I mean, I wasn't knocked out or anything, but I do have a picture of him the next night in the dressing room. He just sat in the corner and didn't say a word, and he looked like he was about half dead. Because I waffled the hell out of him. Yeah, so that was kind of my Johnny Valentine story.
Well, everybody can tell that story. So
yeah, my first night of really meeting the guy. I guess you'd say we got to know each other real well.
I guess so.
But yeah, he was a master. I saw him working later on. After I went to Amarillo, I saw him one of the towns up there. He was working against somebody, and he wasn't working for Funk. I don't know how he happened to be on the card that I witnessed, but he did the same thing. He didn't have 40 minutes, but he had about 20 minutes. He still managed to get his heat by not really doing anything, but still doing things. I mean, he was competing. He wasn't walking and talking, stalling. He was actually in holds. It looked like he wasn't doing much, but he was. He got a reaction when the match was over. There was a response, a good response. So, but yeah, that's my JV story.
And that's because everybody just happens to have one, Bob. Yeah, that's my Johnny Valentine story.
Well,
very cool.
Yeah, it was. I think I got his respect. I mean, if there is such a thing.
Oh, if he said, I think you got it down. I think, I don't know the man. I don't know if Johnny Valentine gave out respect, but I'm sure it was mutual. Something was mutual between you two after that anyway. We'll put it that way. That's
well, you wouldn't consider that a rib, what we did.
No.
Because, ribs are something you'd laugh at. What we were doing, I don't want anything to laugh about because we just brutalized the hell out of each other, but I could have taken him down and, done anything. I could have broken his arms and legs, but I couldn't do that. I wasn't going to do that. I never even thought about doing that to anybody. Well, a few guys, but
sadly, back then, that was kind of, I hate to say it in some ways, kind of paying your dues, to the old guard anyway.
Well, yeah, in a sense, but, I know that story got around, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute, but
okay.
I think that might have had something to do with what happened to me. I'm just realizing that now. It might have had something to do with the way I got treated after that. I mean, obviously I was being figured in, to get a match against Johnny, and he didn't. I don't think he beat me right in the center. If he did, it wasn't like by a pinfall or anything. I
believe it was a disqualification finish.
Yeah. They weren't going to beat me, and that's. For a relative newcomer, really, even if I've been around for a while, I'd been out by that time. I'd been to Amarillo and I'd been to Australia and Japan, so I hadn't been in Florida steadily. But I'd been there the majority of my career, So they'd seen plenty of me, but they hadn't seen me. They hadn't seen me at that verified level, and not everybody gets to work with Johnny Valentine.
No, that's for sure. Nobody has
So-
that story to share with Johnny Valentine either. But you got so many stories to share. We started off this entire thing, 9 episodes. This is episode 10. So
Wow.
nine episodes back, we started off with your rookie matchup, and then we went through a few months of 1969, and slowly we moved away. We spent some time in San Francisco, and I thought this week would be a good time to go back to the beginning and kind of continue to tell that story. So I'm not going to say we have one specific format here on the show, but I do want to keep telling everything in order. And then in between, we can jump around. And we told San Francisco, and I'm sure we're going to tell, various your trips to Japan, things like that, and other stories too. But this episode, we're going to kind of go back where we left off on those episodes. And that's to continue to talk about some of the early talent that you worked with and some of your other early experiences here in the Florida territory in the end of 69 and more so 1970, and some really interesting names to go over here this week.
Yeah, I want to interject something here
Sure.
From a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
For any listener out there who still has a bone to pick with me about Roy Shire or anything else, I hope you'll continue to listen and listen to everything I have to offer. If you do, maybe with time, you'll feel like I have credibility enough that what I'm saying might have more value to you. That, it's not just some buzzard neck puke that came in here and didn't like Roy Shire, but, a guy who had full range and width and breadth of experience in the wrestling business, who was giving an informed opinion. And not only that, but one that's had 40 years of reflection and be able to look back on it, to have it, in my memory banks, just there, and maybe brewing, maybe not, but certainly there, and something I can look back on. But everything that you do, I think, has something to do with your current behavior. Maybe if you don't only see it that way, it maybe change you in some little way that affects maybe 5 seconds of your day every day. That's from something that happened 40 years ago. Anyway, for listeners out there who still have if you're still hot at me about something, well, hang around. Maybe I can make you feel better about things.
No, I like that. Maybe you don't agree out there with whatever went down in San Francisco or whatever the case may be, but Bob offers a lot more than that. That he brings a lot to the table, and I think, as you said, Bob, I didn't really look at it that way, but hang around there for a while, guys, and you'll learn after 20, 30, 40 episodes, you know what? Other than this thing that I disagree with, there's really not a whole lot else that, I'm having an issue with here. So maybe I can go back and reevaluate this, or you can continue to, have your own beliefs. That's the way the world works. Opinions are okay. People, we're human that way, Bob, right? We have our own opinions.
Exactly.
So,
and everybody's entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. I mean, the fact's a fact. You can't say, no, it didn't happen that way. Well, if you can prove it didn't, and that might be very possible.
Sure.
I mean, I said in early outings that I had matches with people that I didn't remember, and I didn't believe. I said, no, I couldn't have. I don't remember. I would have remembered wrestling against Pat Patterson, and somebody sent me a film. I said, well, yeah, obviously I did.
Right.
So again, that memory's not perfect, but in that case, it's not lack of memory. It's that those kind of matches just didn't go in the memory files because, if you got not only your own 3,000 matches, but another 10,000 or 15,000 of other matches you watch, there's only so many memory files that you can put stuff in.
Sure.
So, the good matches, the things, my first match with Bruiser Brody, his first match, I don't remember it. I know I had it because I do remember the setup and everything. He came the week before, he came by the ring and said something. I challenged him. And so the next week, we had a match in Fort Worth. But the match apparently it had to go good because I didn't remember it. Mm-hmm. If it had been some kind of abortion or, really screwed up or somebody got hurt, or after he had to retire from the wrestling business because he looked so horrible. He never got started. Then I'd remember it. But anyway, onward and upward.
Yeah, I can't wait till we get into some Bruiser Brody down the line as well. But I guess we'll go back. We I think the last time we talked about your career back at the beginning in '69, you broke in July. We got to basically the end of the year, right around November or so. You were working the tag team of the Blue Demons. We talked about them a little bit, Rocky Tamayo and Frank Martinez. And then as we close out the year, you work some more tag team matches. You're getting random partners on your side of the match, but you guys are working some seriously established tag teams. And this one, Cris Markoff and Bronko Lubich. And I kind of marked that a little bit because a lot of people know Bronko's name from the referee in World Class later on, much later on in his career. He even managed a little bit there as well. But here it is, Cris Markoff and Bronko Lubich. You say you don't have everybody in your memory files, and I'm not asking you necessarily if you remember these matches per se, but I'm just curious if you have any stories about either one of those guys.
Well, I do remember them because Bronko was, he was nearing the end of his wrestling part of his career. He went on to become a referee out there, and I worked with him as a referee a bunch of times, but not in Florida, but or was he Louisiana? I can't remember. Yeah,
I mean, maybe other places too, but usually Dallas.
Yeah, that's right. He wasn't. He was probably, I don't know, 45, 50. He had black hair, but his body looked, old, and he wasn't in great shape. Markoff was middle European. He had a pretty heavy accent at the time. He was a nice guy. I mean, he was, and they were fine. They were good. I don't know if Aldo Bogny ever teamed up with Bronko, but I remember, and Aldo was older when that first time I saw him in the ring. He was probably 50.
Right.
And and don't get me wrong, I mean, at the time, I just wasn't used to that. In Florida, there weren't a lot of older guys. When I talked the story about, the manager with the cane.
Galento?
Galento, yeah, Mario Galento. He was older, but he wasn't wrestling. He was a manager. He went down the ring with his cane.
Right.
Didn't have a lot of guys who were in their 50s and 60s. Now, we haven't gotten them. We went to England for a little while last week, the week before. But I was reminiscing running through some memories the other day. I remember working a show in Manchester where the main event guy had to be 70 years old. He's bald, white. What hair he had left was white. He had a pair of trunks that looked like he had never washed them, and they was like 50 pounds heavier when he first wore them because
probably
they were
saggy. Wool trunks.
He's saggy. His junk was hanging out, and one of his jock straps was hanging out, and one of his boots was only half laced. And he was sitting there, he was standing in the middle of the ring with a hold on this guy, and the building, it was the main event. The building was sold out. And I'm thinking, my God, this guy looks, and there was a lot of, another guy, Nick, I can't remember this guy's name, or I do remember a guy named Nick McManus. He was also 60s or 70s. And these guys, they got over, and they stayed over, and they just kept working as long as people would buy tickets.
McManus was a huge name over there, yeah.
Oh yeah, and these guys were, Tucker, and they looked their age. It wasn't like they were, great bills. They were a lot older guys. I've known older men, and I've seen guys in the gym at 65 who look great. They've been working out for their whole life, but these guys weren't it. They'd been in every match I wrestled over there. The places that the boys really liked to work was the theater that also had a bar in it, because as soon as you got done wrestling, you go shower and go in the bar, and you could, if you were on first, you had time to drink a couple pitchers before everybody else got in there. So and that they weren't going to the gym after the matches; they were going in the bars. So maybe before the matches too, but and it looked it. But you know what? That's wrestling. What fans, what they believe. They've seen these guys for 25, 30, 40 years, and they said, well, he's got to be tough. He's been getting beat on, or he's been beating these people for 45 years now. I guess he can still do it, so we'll go see him do it. How can you argue with success? Now, there might be purists out there and say, oh, that's a disgrace. Some 70-year-old guy with his junk hanging out shouldn't be out there in the ring. Well, if the building's full, yeah, you should. Because if I'm on the card, I was on the card that night, I made a good payoff, as opposed to having some young buck like me in the main event where there's 10 people in the house, your payoff is some peanut husk from the floor. No, whatever works. Let's see, how did we get segued to England again?
It was Cris Markoff somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the most memorable thing I have with Cris was in a place called Belglade, Florida.
Okay.
And we were in a tag team match against, I don't remember who, it doesn't matter. But we were getting some pretty good heat. We were against a couple of Hispanic wrestlers. There were a lot of migrant workers in Belglade. They had some produce fields around there that, strawberries, something that had a lot of migrant workers in the area, and they would come to the matches. And we were getting some heat on a Hispanic babyface, and all of a sudden we hear this in a Hispanic accent, "You will stop that." And we turn around, and here's this guy. He's a local chief or sub-chief of police. He's got his police uniform on. He's got his gun out.
Wow.
And he's saying, "You guys will stop doing that." He acted like he was going to shoot us if we kept beating this guy up. What are you going to do with that?
So you're getting heat to the point where they're drawing their guns on you. I gotcha.
Yeah. Well, that didn't happen very often. That didn't happen again. I told him when I told the officer about it, I said, man, maybe you need to get somebody else for security in that place. But anyway, on our way back to the dressing room, Cris was looking the wrong way, and this woman hit him with her purse. And she knocked him down, and he got up, and he was like half loop, half goofy. I grabbed him by the arm and took him in the dressing room, and his nose was bleeding, and he had one of his eyes was puffed up, and I had like a thing on his forehead that was bleeding. She apparently had something, a brick or something,
sure, yeah,
a big rock or something in her purse, because she just waffled the hell out of them. And one of the photographers, either Apter or Napolitano, was there that night. One of the magazine guys they would come down the floor. They would go to different territories and take pictures for their magazines. Was there and got a picture of Cris. He's looking in the mirror and he was hot. He was cussing. He wanted to go out there and I said, I wouldn't go out there and take on that woman if I were you. She kicked your butt the first time, So they took a picture of him looking in the mirror with that. And later on, a few months later, I saw it on, I'm not sure if it was on the cover. It might have been. Maybe not the cover, but like a cover with 4 or 5 different pictures, or, little sections on. One of them was Cris bleeding, and there was this angle he got into a beef with, somebody horrible, and, this was the result of it. No, this was the result of about a 300-pound woman hitting him in the face with her purse. That doesn't have quite the same ring as him going toe-to-toe with Johnny Valentine, for example. So,
that's homework for our wrestling listeners out there. If anybody knows what magazine Bob's talking about, please post a picture on one of my social media accounts or send it to Bob as well, because it'd be fun to see that picture and see what you're referencing there. The picture of Cris Markoff with a bloody knot on his head or whatever the case may be there. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. Oh, he was hot. He was yelling, and he had this. He still does to an extent, not as much, but he had this charming accent. He didn't cuss just in plain English. He had an accent, the Middle European, whatever it was,
sure.
And so he was cussed up a storm, and he wasn't thinking about going out there and trying to get revenge. Reminds me of another story. Working another show. Who was the black manager? Big tall guy. He had wrestled for a long time.
What era would this
Bearcat
Bearcat Wright, yeah.
Bearcat Wright. Bearcat was a heck of a guy. I've got another story, but I'll just tell the one now about out in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
We were at a show. I don't remember where, but it wasn't a big building. There's a couple hundred people there. Well, it was like a college or a high school gymnasium. And they had bleachers, And so we were talking before the match, but nobody was there yet. Bearcat and I were there early for some reason before they opened the box office. I was working in the office. I was assistant booker, and I said something about, somebody had gone out into the audience the night before in Miami or someplace. And so I was talking to Bearcat about that. I said, yeah, I said, I really hate it when guys do that, because, the very best can come of it is that nobody gets hurt. I said, the worst is if people get hurt, the wrestler gets hurt, you get all kinds of lawsuits and all. I'm talking from the standpoint of someone working in the office of trying to be fiscally responsible and all that.
Right.
So during my match, I'm in the ring, we're getting introduced, and I see this motion up in the audience, up at the top of the bleachers, probably about maybe 35, 40 yards away. And whap, something hits me in the chest. It's a 50-cent piece. A person up in the top bleachers had thrown this thing and hit me with it. And I lost it. I took off, and I ran. I charged up through the bleachers. I mean, people were scattering. People thought I'd lost my mind. Nobody, because this person was at the very back, so all the people sitting in front of them didn't see him throw it.
Right.
They had no idea why I charged out of the ring. I mean, like a maniac. I just lost it. And I charged up the stairs, screaming, I'm going to kill you. And the person that threw it, by the time I got up to the top and was going down the aisle to try to get, or down the row of seats to get them, they took off the other way and ran out of the building. And so I worked my way back down to the ring. So later on that night, or later that evening in the dressing room, Bearcat says to me, said, Bob, I really appreciate that advice you gave me about not leaving the ring and going out and messing around in the audience.
Well, you set him up good for that one.
Here, I'm telling him, be responsible. Don't go out in the audience and cause these problems. And I go charging all the way up, as far away from the ring as I can get without running through the wall. And, I think it's funny.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, when you tell stories about your own idiocy, I think it's helpful because I try to tell our listener out there that we're not knocking people. We're just telling what happened.
No, just having fun.
And I can tell what happened to me too. Yeah. I'm as big an idiot as anybody I'm talking about. So,
could have put your arm around Bearcat and said, do as I say, not as I do. Bearcat.
Yeah, there you go. Well, he was fun. You talk about a guy with class. We were coming back from Tallahassee. You're coming back from Tallahassee. The car broke down. It was me, Dick Murdoch, Buddy Colt, and Bearcat Wright. Now, Buddy had the plane crash where he messed up his ankle, so he's semi-crippled. He couldn't, not crippled, but he was impaired. And, he couldn't run for it if he had to. He couldn't. He wasn't capable of it. And here we are broken down, and it's just like after the matches. So it's, say, 11:30, like 11 o'clock, 10:30, say. It's the night before hunting season opens down there in Florida. We're in, I don't want to say Ocala, that wasn't it. Perry, I think, is the name of the little town. Yeah, Perry. Because that's where the Forest Festival was. Yeah, Perry, Florida. And that memory, I haven't thought of that town in many, many years. Anyway, so we found a place to get the car fixed. Well, we got Bearcat, Buddy, and Murdoch and myself. Now, we're all healed. That's one thing. The other thing is Bearcat's black. This town is, I'm not trying to be derogatory, but, we're talking about this 1970s.
Sure, I see where this is going.
Redneck city. I mean, you got some serious racists in there. So took a couple hours to get the car fixed. While we're there, the word gets out that these wrestlers over at so-and-so's garage, we probably had, 25, 30 different people come by to check us out. And all of them are white and all men. And they didn't come in with arms. None of them walked in with, a couple guys had pistols on their belts. I don't know why I don't think they hunted with them, but nobody brought in their shotgun or their rifle or anything. But we knew they were armed. It's the day before hunting season. These guys are, as soon as it turns midnight, they're going to start hunting, or definitely, it's party night, and all of them have been drinking. So you talk about a loaded situation, being on tether hooks about somebody getting on somebody raced us, creating a problem for Bearcat,
right?
Because we weren't going to know, we were all in it together. Nobody was going to desert him. And we had a problem with Buddy not even being able to run. We had to run for our lives.
Yeah.
So I remember that, and Bearcat showed a lot of class on that. And one of the things that really helped, there was a guy that could have started some trouble. This typical guy who started out with saying, well, isn't that stuff you guys do, isn't that all fake and all that? Which, if they, our reaction to that in those days was always defiant and kind of anger, being insulted like that, because, and there was a purpose, because if you didn't do that, if you admitted to it, you were letting someone insult you. And if you had heat, now you're saying, well, I got heat, you're mad at me, but I'm not even tough enough to stick up for myself. So you leave yourself very vulnerable. So you almost have to defend yourself, and in terms of verbally, you got to tell them to F off, or, well, Buddy Colt, rest in peace, Buddy. He had the experience. He'd been working a while before he got hurt. He was one of the top heels everywhere, but not his whole career, but at this stage in his career, he was one of the top heels. Mm-hmm. Certainly in Florida, he was earning enough money to buy a twin-engine plane, the one he crashed and crippled himself. But this little pipsqueak came in. There was 4 or 5 other guys hanging around, looking in, a couple inside, 3 or 4 of them outside. And we can hear them mumbling and murmuring and all this, and it didn't sound real positive. And this one guy said something about it being fake, and Buddy said, well, the guy said, well, like that sleeper, that's faking it. Well, Buddy said, well, let me show you. And he put the guy to sleep. And, the guy got where he needed to be. Buddy was sitting down. I think the guy got down in front of him, got down on his knees. Buddy put the sleeper on and put him out. And so, when he woke him up, it took all the tension. That could have gone 2 ways. People would have gotten really pissed off, or they could have just said, well, it went the way I'm glad it did, because we didn't have to fight or run. I just remember Bearcat being in that situation and being a class act. He was never, he was strong, very strong and formidable looking in a situation like that. I mean, I would hate to think of myself in a situation where, like in Iraq, for example, where, you're the only American there and everybody else is Iraqi, and they'll hate you.
Right.
Just for being American. And now you're Bearcat and you're the only black man there, and they hate you because you're black. So he showed a lot of class, and I just wanted to tell that story because I think the story itself is interesting. You talk about a nightmare for wrestlers, the heels, to get stuck in a situation like that where, on a typical Friday night, these guys wouldn't have been still out. They wouldn't be driving around town waiting for midnight for the season to open. They'd be in the bar or somewhere. They wouldn't be running around town to where the word could get out that we were stuck there. So, So
well, cool. I didn't even have Bearcat on my list, but man, that was I wasn't going to stop you. That's kind of like the Don Fargo thing. It wasn't anywhere near the Don Fargo thing, but it's like, well, it wasn't on the docket for today. But man, once you got going, I was like, hey, I don't have a problem with this. And it fits in. It was in Florida, but I mean, just in general, I wouldn't have stopped you there because that's pretty cool, and you got to respect guys who I don't know if it was love for the business, love for that money they were making, or what the case may be, the camaraderie, whatever the deal is, you got to respect guys like Bearcat and some of the other, early African Americans that really worked against the grain and just, like you said, just strong-willed people that just fought the good fight to, make a buck and really help with the history as well.
Yeah, my first book, Deathmatch, Bearcat's one of the main characters who faces this this rookie that I've got breaking in. I'm using my own experience. It's fiction based on fact, loosely based on fact. But Bearcat, I thought enough of Bearcat. He was one of the guys that I had in the dressing room and one of the main characters in the book. So I thought a lot of him. He was a good guy. I liked him a lot.
Very
cool. I liked him a lot. I respected him. Here in the South, don't get me wrong. I don't hold anybody, no matter what you would have to do to make a living. But a lot of the black wrestlers in the South, first of all, there weren't many. Bearcat was one of the guys who was willing to be a heel, and Ernie Ladd was the other. And I got all the admiration and respect in the world for guys going in a place where that there's a lot of people out there that hate you just on sight because right. You're black, and to go in there and make interviews like Ernie did. I talked about it before.
Yes,
making interviews like, "Hey, white boy, come on down, I'll kick your butt." And then Bearcat been out there and being a manager and doing. He was on television, and everything else, getting that heat. Yeah, I had all the respect in the world for those guys.
The irony of this, Bob, is another one of the names on the list here. Today we're going to be talking about almost the opposite end of what you're talking about right now in Bearcat Wright. We're not going to get there yet, but you'll see what I'm talking about if you don't know already before this show concludes.
Well, are you going to maul me if I don't?
Well, I guess you know exactly where we're going to go, but we're not getting there yet because something a little more lighter before we get there. I fast forward a little bit into your career here. I was noticing at least a half a dozen times over the months of February and March of 1970, you wrestled a fellow by the name of Frank Hickey. Would you like to tell everyone out there Frank's second job, Bob?
Well, one of the derivative or descriptive names that he had was Spaceman.
That's
Spaceman Frank Hickey, which was very very appropriate.
Spaceman. Why don't you describe him to the people?
Well, first of all, the boys talked about him. He was such a character that the guys would love. The guys always loved telling stories, so they were talking about him as being this really eccentric character. And the first time I saw him, I came into a dressing room, and I was pure sport, and there's newspaper everywhere on the floor, on the benches, and Frank, this guy. Had on a bright red top and blue tights and purple shorts, and had on like an aviator's hat that was yellow. Was still putting out newspaper. He was a germaphobe, and he didn't want to touch anything.
Don't forget the cape.
That's right. He had a cape on, and this guy looked to be about 60 years old. He wasn't very big. He was about 5'10", No, he wasn't even that tall. He was like 5'9". He was very friendly, nice guy. I'd heard of him. I'd seen what the card was. So, I knew, but he never came to TV. As far as I know, never was on TV in Florida. If he was, it wasn't while I was there. But so I'd never seen him before. And he was only booked on spot shows occasionally. You're looking for someone new and different to book, and maybe you don't have anybody else available. He's one of the guys on your list. Yeah, I was working with, and I would talk. He and I were the only ones in the dressing room for a while before anybody else got there. I usually got there early. I was working in the office, and he got there early himself. Every show, the couple shows I was on with him, he was there when I got there, and we were the first two there. So anyway, when we go out to the ring. It's a National Guard armory, but it's an Air National Guard armory. And we're in that ring, and we're being introduced, and Stu Schwartz was the referee. And, here's Frank. He's got the cape on. He's got the aviator cap on, the one with the, like Amelia Earhart. It's like a skull cap, It's got the strap under the chin.
And 55 years old at the time, too, Bob.
Was he? He looked it. And he was a nice guy. Again, he wasn't babbling or raving or anything. He was, he just was a serious character. It was a great gimmick, because everybody would talk. It was so outrageous. Everybody was talking. Boys loved to talk about it, and he was a visual sight.
That's one way to put it.
Well, a show business.
Well, we kind of mentioned this off air, but I just said the ludicrousy in wrestling, only in wrestling, can a spaceman wrestle an Olympian? Just amazing what you get in professional wrestling.
Yes. Or an Olympian can wrestle a lady wrestler or a little person wrestler,
Sure.
And it's acceptable. People will buy it.
Sure.
Yeah. It's a great business, isn't it?
Yeah,
but
tremendous.
anyway, I'm trying. I mean, I'm not thinking about cracking up or anything because I took it serious. Oh, we got to have a match, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't going to go beat him in 10 seconds or anything. We had to have a match of some kind. I didn't know what he was capable of doing. I don't remember if I think I was still a babyface.
Pretty sure.
It doesn't matter.
You were a babyface here in 70.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I was curious what he was going to do to try to get heat on me because I was, much younger. But anyways, we've come to the center of the ring, and Stu Schwartz has got he's got one arm on his left, Frank's on his right, and Stu looks at me and he's checking my hand, he's checking my fingernails and all that. He as I look at him, he raises his eyebrows and he looks up a little bit. I look up where he's looking, and right above the ring, this is an National Guard Armory. There's a miniature plane there. It's about 8 feet long. And Stu said, well, look, I guess we're seeing how Frank got here tonight. And I lost it. Stu had hold of both my hands. I ripped my right hand out of his, and otherwise I was going to bray laughter right out into his face.
Right.
And somebody said, well, Bob Roop must have the most ticklish hands in the business. All Schwartz did was touch him, and he burst into laughter. I had to cover my mouth because, this is a serious business. I've got a guy out here, for all I know, he's got a space gun under that suit. He's going to pull out and blow me into molecules.
There you go.
So I was supposed to be taking it serious here.
Because that sounds like a serious situation.
And Stu Schwartz had a great sense of humor, and that was I had to fight. I had to really, and when you're young in the business or any new venture, you have that kind of the energy built up that is really, if you do lose it, like towards laughter, you'll just go way overboard because it's kind of a nervous release, and I was definitely there. The other time, while we're talking about breaking up in the ring, I might as well tell about the other time I did it. I was working with a guy that went as Oki Shikina.
Oh, yeah.
He was a Hispanic wrestler. I'm not sure of his true name, but he wrestled as Oki Shikina. He had me in a headlock, but I was looking up, and he was in the headlock, and Sonny Myers was the referee, and he said, it's 10-2. And I said, 10 to what? He said, 10 to your own affairs. This is a horseshit match. And I cracked up. And in order to hide it, what I had to do was I had to turn my face and I put it in Oki's side to hide that I was, because he had my arms blocked. Right. I couldn't cover my own face. So I had to put my face in his side to hide the fact that I'm laughing like a maniac. Well, he's ticklish. Oki's ticklish. So when I'm laughing into his side, I'm tickling the hell out of him. He lets go of the headlock. He's scooting on his butt, trying to get away from me.
Oh, my God.
I'm hanging on to him for dear life because if he gets away from me, everybody's going to see I'm laughing. Why am I laughing hysterically in the ring when this guy's got me in a headlock? We're going to be exposing the business. So I'm hanging on for dear life. He's sitting on his butt, and he's digging in his feet, and he's dragging his butt away from me as fast as he can move. We did about 2 laps around the ring like that. I mean, I would give anything to have that on tape, on video, because that had to be most ridiculous. People had to say, well, even wrestlers would go and say, man, I've seen some weird high spots. I've never seen that one before.
Yeah. Well, but it certainly didn't make the match any better at that point.
You remember the one I told about Sputnik? Jimmy Hodge grabbing his ankle and squeezing, and Sputnik flapping his arms like he's trying to fly away and going, I quit.
Yeah.
Well, this had to be the same thing. I mean, people think, what is Roop doing? Is he Roop biting the guy?
Right. What is happening here?
What's going on here? Yeah.
There was an Oki Shikina before him who was much earlier in wrestling history, but I think that one, the one you're referring to, he wrestled some as Pedro Zapata as well.
Right,
But,
right.
I know exactly who you're talking about from that time period, so very cool. But I wanted to just for anybody out there that was little has any interest, maybe never heard of the Spaceman Frank Hickey prior to now, and they're like, wait a minute, there was a wrestler in the 60s and 70s that professed to be a spaceman? Yes, absolutely. And look no further. There are pictures online from his career, but actually, Bob, there's video footage of Frank Hickey much later in his career after retiring, say 25 years, maybe longer. He pops up randomly on an episode of Memphis Wrestling in 1993. I think he was like 78 years old or something like that. And he actually, if you want to call it, wrestles a match. You can imagine how it went. But imagine Frank Hickey reappearing in the 90s wearing the same exact costume that he wore back in the 60s and even early 70s there. But it is out there. It's USWA TV from 1993. Spaceman
Wow.
Frank Hickey, guys. Go look it up yourselves. Sadly, now, he did that in May of 93. He passes away in December of 93. But you have to think, with a character like that, he probably enjoyed that last ride into the sun before he got, quote-unquote, beamed up to a higher being.
Well, now you got me laughing. You talk about a guy passed away. You know, this is macabre, Bob Roop. You talk about somebody dying, he laughs. No, that part, yeah. But, that was a good way for him to go, I think, to have that last little time in the spotlight, you know. Yeah. He was a nice guy. I mean, I liked him. I wasn't around him much, but we talked. We were in the dressing room together and I chatted with him. I didn't ask for his whole background or anything, but he was a nice enough man. That's cool. And he was a character. People were talking about him, so there were a lot of guys that didn't have the wherewithal or the thought process or the genius or whatever to come up with a gimmick that could get them booked when they're in their 70s or 80s. Yeah.
Right.
So you got to give the guy credit, don't you?
You say Frank was a nice man, but off air you also referred to somebody else as a nice man, and this blew me away because I hadn't even realized that he pops up here just for a handful of matches around this time period in March of 1970 as well, heading back to March 24th in the Armory in Tampa. Bob Roop defeated a fellow by the name of Bobby Heenan, and I had to ask you off air. I said, do you remember working or being around Bobby Heenan? You said, oh, yeah, he was a great guy. And I wanted you to, if you could, share maybe a little bit here about your thoughts on one of the most legendary, I mean, not just wrestlers, but let's just say performers, managers, everything, commentators, hosts. I mean, he could do it all. Your memories of Bobby Heenan.
Yeah, Bobby was a great guy who he could do it all. And, his life took a really unfortunate turn. He got sick and, he just, I can't say what would have been better, but I'm sure I wish he hadn't had to suffer so long. Mm-hmm. But, good guy. He was good. He was a good enough talent. We wrestled in Tampa. I wrestled a match against him in Tampa. And what stood out on it was that Bobby was was blonde and he was light skinned. He wasn't swarthy or, he didn't have like a dark tone. He had very, very white skin. Yeah. He wasn't albino, but he was light skinned.
Sure.
And he had come down to Florida. Apparently he spent at least an hour or 2 hours out in the pool or somewhere because he was sunburned. He came out and he had on a singlet and short and tights, but his legs and his arms and his face and his back were just, I'm talking beet red. He was burned. He wasn't blistered. And Bobby, he didn't complain afterwards. I mean, I didn't do any. The wrestlers would have thought it funny to slap him. Do the
take advantage of it. Oh yeah,
slap to the chest 4 or 5 times. But no, I didn't. I tried to take care of him because the thing is that Bobby was good enough. Now here I am, an Olympian, big, much more muscular than Bobby. Much bigger, and yet he was credible enough that we were able to have a match that when I beat him, it meant something. I mean, it wasn't like And he wasn't known as a wrestler. He was basically a manager. But he would come to Florida, and in fact, it occurred to me why he wrestled when he came to Florida, because there's no way really he could manage. So wrestlers would come. One of the great things about working in Florida was in the wintertime, guys would come down from up north. They would come down for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever, and they would get booked for, at least one match, sometimes two or three.
Right.
And what they could do is that way, by working and getting a paycheck there, they could deduct their vacation. They could deduct it, as a working. They could take it, everything, their hotel, their cost if they flew or if they drove, all their costs they could deduct from their income, from their taxes as an expense. So they would, a lot of guys, I was telling you privately earlier, Larry Henning came down, and I'd seen Larry on cover of magazines for, several times, and he was very impressive looking, great big, burly, nasty, nice guy, but he was a formidable looking guy. And I worked with him, I think, in Jacksonville, and he put me over right in the middle of the ring, which he should have. But I was young in the business, and I didn't expect that kind of thing. But to beat guys like that leads into something there. We'll get into it later about the reason I was booked with some of the people I worked with was just for that purpose, was to try to get me over to where I meant something there in Florida, that they were going to try to use me as quickly as they could to try to help draw money. Yeah, and Bobby was a sweet guy. I saw him when I was on top, and I saw him when I was not on top anymore, and he was just as friendly and kind and sweet as he was in either situation. Our fortunes had reversed, for example, where he was really making it big, and my fortunes had declined. Now, when I say my fortunes declined, the last time I saw him, I was an agent for Turner in 1990, and so I think it was Baltimore. I don't remember. I saw him on an elevator, and he was getting off, I was getting on. But just, same thing, sweet guy. Hello, Bobby, how you doing? And so, yeah, he's a guy that, it's nice. You got people you remember that you can, when you remember them, something nice happens in your inside.
Sure.
You
especially so many years apart. And like you said, Bobby's success by that point, if he was a dick deep down, he could have easily used it by that point. He had managed Andre to WrestleMania and everything by then. But that's really cool that no matter whether it was 1970 or 1990, it's the same guy, a really good guy. That's good to hear.
Well, there's another factor that is psychologically interesting. Bobby understood that it was a work, that no matter what you seem to be, you're not really that. You've got a role you're playing. Right. And that role might be more important. You are supposedly this person, but you can be replaced, and, it's not going to last forever. Enjoy it and be glad for it and like the money you're making to doing it, but don't cut your bridges to everybody that you met on your way getting up there. Right. And saying, okay, I'm above all you people now. Look at me now. I got no time for you people anymore because I've made it big now. Because again, we're talking about something. Now, it's one thing if you're fighting for real, if you're a mixed martial artist or something, and you're fighting for real, or you're a singer or whatever, and you're competing for real, and you make it. Well, I'm not saying you can go ahead and look down on people, but I'm saying, you can be proud of your accomplishments because it can't be taken away from you. Just although you can lose your voice or you can get old, which happens to everybody, and you can lose your position. So, but Bobby was always the same. He was a real person. You weren't dealing with somebody that put on a persona. The guys that wore their wrestling persona wherever they went. I mean, when you're private with them. Sure. And when we get into Dusty Rhodes, we'll talk about that a little bit. I got a really interesting thing I want to share with you when we get into with everybody out there. I mean, it's not a put down. It's just interesting.
Work the gimmick, man.
Yeah.
So here's a guy who worked two gimmicks, if you want to call it that. Up next here, I noticed you worked him quite a bit in the month of June, specifically here in 1970. I wanted to discuss this week. Kind of a dual life led by a fellow by the name of Larry Hamilton. Some people know him as the Missouri Mauler, who was a legendary heel in some territories. But I'm just want to read a couple of the matches off to you here because I don't know that you recall. I don't know that anything really transpired on television to set anything up, but there's a lot of pretty big matches here involving you and Larry throughout June for whatever reason in 1970. I don't have a lot of input outside of the matches were booked. And it's in Jacksonville, you do a couple of matches with them. June 18th, Bob Roop goes to a draw with the Missouri Mauler. Following week, June 25th in Jacksonville, it's Eddie Graham, Hiro Matsuda, and Bob Roop taking on Thunderbolt Patterson, El Lobo, which was Luke Graham under a hood, and the Missouri Mauler. The following day, Tallahassee, June 26th, it's Jack Briscoe and Bob Roop versus Thunderbolt Patterson and the Missouri Mauler. And finally, June 29th in Orlando, another six-man, Don Carson, Hiro Matsuda, and Bob Roop versus Thunderbolt Patterson, Dale Lewis, and the Missouri Mauler in an elimination match. Now, I don't know if there was a reason behind all these matches all at once, because you weren't really working them before or after this time period, but we got into a little more discussion about the Mauler off air as well, and we'll talk about that. But first, I was hoping we could talk about the wrestling performer, the wrestler, Larry Hamilton.
Well, he was, you say Mauler, that's the guy that's like just punching all the time and, never lets up. It was a good name. But he didn't do that. But he wasn't a guy that did a lot of high spots. You get a headlock on him, he shoot you off, and you hit him with a tackle, and then you arm drag him or whatever. He wasn't that kind of heel.
Right.
He was more of a power, feel you out, club you down type of heel. The thing that whatever he was I had good matches with him. And it didn't matter if he went over or if I went over. Even if he beat me, which when I first started, he did. When I was green and I was learning how to even just, basically make my way around the ring a little bit, he would go ahead and go over. I'm not sure if he pinned me or DQ. I don't know. He might have. He was one of the top heels. But the matches were always good. I didn't have to worry about coming out of there and people going, first of all, he was close to my size. I was big enough that, he wasn't someone half my size who made me look, like that was, let's go back to Bobby Heenan for a second. I was so much bigger than Bobby. The fact that he could make himself credible in a match against me is to his credit. He was talented. Now, Larry Hamilton, the Missouri Mauler, was again bigger and he looked the part, and he was a tough guy. He was, he grew up hard. He's a brother of Jody Hamilton, one of the assassins, the legendary assassins.
Right.
And both those guys are tough guys. They're those guys. I wouldn't want to cross them. I didn't want to be caught with their wife or anything. I wouldn't even think about that. But I wouldn't. I just wouldn't want to have them mad at me because you got a guy that if he decides he'd want to try to hurt you, even if you can protect yourself, you're going to get hurt at least a little bit. So that's the kind of guy you just don't want to mess with. But the thing is, we had good matches, and I always respected that. I didn't care what the guys. First of all, people's politics. You don't talk about race, religion. You don't talk about that stuff in company, and so we didn't talk about that kind of stuff in the dressing room. And if there was racial bias in the dressing room, you didn't see it. Guys were conditioned or something. They were smart enough not to show it because you had to work with everybody. You had to work with whatever, blacks, Indian from like India, Pakistan, Chinese, Japanese, because it was and that was one of the things that made a great card, is to have a bunch of different, not just standard like all white American guys. Have a mixed card, with all different kinds of races and creeds and backgrounds in it. And that's what made pro wrestling kind of, to me, made it a lot more interesting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the Mauler was he was very uninformed in terms of racial understanding. And he grew up in a very racist society when his brother wrote a book and described some of that himself. Jody Hamilton wrote a book with Scott Teal. That's a good book. If you got to.
That's a great book. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. You can go to Crowbar Press. Crowbar, like your crowbar you use to jack open a trunk or something. Press, and you can order Scott Teal's got a couple dozen really, really great books. And Larry Hamilton is one of them. But
crowbar, like the weapon that Bob Roop may or may not have used on Dick Slater in a bar one time, but we're not going to get into that right now. Get back to Larry Hamilton.
I'll have you know, it wasn't a crowbar; it was a 17-inch leather sap.
Okay.
That I bought from the chief of police in Fort Lauderdale. Was a security at our matches, and he gave it to me as a gift one time. So that's what Dick Slater
can't wait to get there.
Ran into, but I mean, he was trying to hurt me at the time.
Oh, I know.
I didn't go looking for him, but anyway.
Back to Larry.
Yeah. Larry was very, very ultra right conservative in his beliefs. And his racial makeup. And now you never saw it in the dressing room, but in Florida, when you worked in Florida, you had to go to Puerto Rico and you had to go to the Bahamas. Now, Puerto Rico, I don't remember Larry ever being too upset about that, but he hated going to the Bahamas because not everybody in the Bahamas is black. There's mixed, there's people. There's a whole melange of colors from black to brown to white that are Bahamians. There's a lot of most of the population, or a good part of it, is black, and Larry Hamilton, he grew up being told that he was to hate those people or not respect them. He didn't want to be around them, and the thing was, when we flew in there on a private plane, it wasn't a problem because you didn't have to go through customs. But when you flew in commercial, you had to go through customs. And now, especially when I first started in 1969, the Bahamas were still a British territory. What did you say?
Commonwealth?
Commonwealth. There you go. That's the right word. Exactly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
They were a Commonwealth country for Great Britain. Well, several years into my career, a Bahamian named Leonard Pendling was looking for Bahamian independence and created enough of a stir. And the other thing is maybe the Bahamas were too expensive for, Great Britain to maintain. So they gave over the Commonwealth and let the Bahamians elect their own government. They had this Leonard Pendling was their first prime minister. Well, what happened after that was that instead of when you went in there and you went through customs, instead of having British customs agents, you had Bahamians. And unfortunately, the people that we first had were rude. They would order you around, and I saw bunches of people who would come in there and be treated so rudely at customs. They turn around and go back and get on a flight. They came in there to gamble at the casino on Paradise Island, and it was so distasteful just trying to get in the country. They went and got on a plane, flew down to San Juan to gamble, down to Puerto Rico, rather than go through all the hassle of being treated. Well, I didn't like them. I mean, I didn't have any racial bias, but nobody likes being treated rudely and being ordered around. Well, Mauler you talk about, one thing is just having to deal with it at all, but being ordered around, it was just a nightmare for him. But he managed, he was working there, so he had to take the bookings. He had to go there. He had to put up with it, and he did. Now, one time after the Bahamians got self-rule, I wasn't on the show that time, but he wasn't allowed in the country, and he got sent back, and he didn't mind that at all. But he had to get back on the plane and go back, take his return flight back instead of the next day. He had to take it the same day. And what happened is when the customs agent asked for his passport, he said something. Larry gave it to him, and the guy asked him a question that Larry didn't understand. He said, "Well, listen, man, what can I tell you?" And because he called him man, I guess the guy got offended, like if maybe he called him a boy or something.
Okay.
And that was just that's what Larry said. That was his story.
Sure.
Now, a few years later, we were in Freeport, and Larry and there was a hotel. Lester Welch was the one that was the one from the office, the Florida office, that was running the shows down there at that time. Mm-hmm. He flew us in there on his plane. And we were staying at a hotel that they had arranged through the Florida wrestling office for us to stay at. And there's one of these places that had like 4 or 5 floors. They all had doors facing an inner courtyard. There's probably 100 rooms. Larry and I and Dick Steinborn were in a room, and we were telling wrestling stories, and we were drinking some rum after a show one Friday or Saturday night. And we're telling stories, and they had the windows they had in the rooms. Jealousy, I think they're called, windows, where there's a little handle you can turn in a circle, and the windows will like slowly unfold to open them and close them. It's like 5 or 6 3-inch or 4-inch wide panes of glass will open up or shut.
Right.
Well, they're not noise proof. I mean, the noise can get out. Well, we're telling stories, and we're drinking, and we're laughing. It got pretty loud, probably. And at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, Larry went out to get ice. He was coming back, and all of a sudden we heard this. I can't say what he said, but it had about 9 or 10 really, really good, the effective swear words in a row about Cuban something or other. Come on down here, I'll kill you, or whatever. And apparently he was on his way back from getting the ice, and a Bahamian man of color came out on the terrace above him. He was like 8 or 9 feet above Larry. Larry couldn't get his hands on him if he wanted to, but the guy came out and said, "Hey, how about holding it down? We're trying to get some sleep in here."
Right.
And that was enough. And I don't know, Larry said something back to him. The guy said something back, and all of a sudden he's a Cuban and about 9 or 10 different swear words. Well, as a result, we all got kicked out of the hotel. Not that night, but when we checked out, and when Lester Welch checked out, he was told that our business was no longer welcome there. So I guess they were giving us a rate or whatever. I don't know. Well, Lester didn't like me. I don't know why. I wasn't in love with him either, but I didn't. I tried not to show it. But he went back to Eddie Graham. He went back when we got back to the office. He went in and told Eddie Graham that I had gotten us kicked out of the hotel. So I get a call from Eddie, and it's from the office. And Eddie's, his voice is cold. It's like ice. Hey, I want you to cut, he's like, I want you to, just vicious. Come to my place. Meet me at my place, my house. Well, I have no idea what it's about, but I go to his house. He's out in the back. He's living right on a canal. He's got a boat, a little dock out there with his boat. It's one of those boats you can hang up on these, whatever. Yeah, he's got straps so you can lift it out of the water. And he was back there sunning. And so when as I come in, I expected him to be this frosty guy. Sounded like he wanted to bite my head off. But when I came up, he was all smiles and, because I look at it now. Eddie had seen me take guys that were the best wrestlers, amateur wrestlers, around Tampa and just handle them. And take Matsuda down 25 times in a row without him being able to do a thing to me. So, he knew I could do whatever I wanted to with him if I lost it for some reason. So Eddie really didn't want to take any chances of pissing me off, although he wouldn't have really had to worry about it. But he didn't know that. The reason that he was so nasty on the phone was because Lester was listening. Lester was in the office with him when he called me.
Okay.
And the reason Eddie had me meet him at his house was because Lester wasn't at his house when I got there.
Right.
And then Eddie said, told me, he said, yeah, Lester came back, told me you guys, had a problem. But he said, I talked to the Mauler and I talked to Larry, and he said, he told me it was his fault, that you didn't have anything to do with it. And he said he's willing to leave. He said he can just say that, his mother's sick and all that, and he can leave today. And he said, that's not necessary. But the reason I'm telling that story, it shows you what kind of guy that Larry Hamilton was. He was a stand-up guy. He wasn't going to let me take the blame, or Dick Steinborn.
It's so weird how many different dynamics a human being can have, because at the same time that is a stand-up thing to do. Hey, he didn't have to go and take the blame for that. You were already given the blame. But he went up himself and said, hey, I did it and everything. But at the same time, it's hard to look past some of the the dark side of Larry Hamilton as well, though.
Well, yeah, but we'll get to that in just a second. But
sure.
back to his attitude about that. This guy's given up a $600, $700, $800 a week job.
Yeah, that's where he was huge. He was main eventing, semi-main eventing there.
Yeah, maybe more. But I mean, at least that much. You're talking about now in today's dollars, that's like $2,000, $2,500. That's what he was giving up to go with his job. Now he was going to be able to go somewhere else to work, but he wasn't going to start out making $700, $800 a week. He was going to have to work his way up to that. Yeah, I mean, when you're leaving one area, you're even thinking about leaving. You start looking around. You start calling around the country, people wrestlers or whoever, and find out somebody who needs somebody like you. Somebody, if you want to work as a single heel, somebody needs a single heel on top now. Well, if you're underneath and you don't confident about being on top, you don't feel like you can handle it, then you say, yeah, I'm working underneath, but you got any room for, people underneath? And you might even have people in your own office, the booker in your own office, help get you booked somewhere else if you have a good relationship with them.
Right.
But when you're a veteran, you look around yourself. Who needs somebody? Because you want a spot. You want a place that you can go and make some money.
Yeah.
You don't want to, because you got to move. You got to go yourself. Usually you got to go first to see if you're going to make it. And then once you do, then you have your family come, and you, of course, moving expenses, all that, getting a new place in your new area, all that, and making sure you do make it. Because if you don't, then and you moved everybody out there, then and you have to leave within a few months, and all that money was actually wasted. So yeah, there's a lot of things to consider, in terms of finances. So for Larry to take all those things into consideration and be willing to take the blame himself and totally absolve, because, Dick and I, in fact, I think I brought the rum. Steinborn and I were drinking too. We were the one making the noise too,
right?
That the guy complained about. So, we were just as much at fault as Larry was, but he's willing to take all the blame. And see, that to me is a stand-up guy. Now, I already mentioned before about him being racist.
Right.
Yeah, and so I don't approve of that. I mean, I'm not racist myself. I told you a story earlier about what I heard. I never saw it, but I heard that he and Homer Odell, who was a manager, they were both ultra conservatives, to where they would put on Nazi SS uniforms, the black uniforms, in the house. They wouldn't go out in public with them. They'd put them on in one of their houses, or, I don't know if they took turns or whatever, but they would wear them around the house, and, they were imitating Nazi monsters, horrible people, murdered 6 million or more Jews.
Yeah.
They had some serious problems, psychologically with, living a life where you hate a bunch of people just on sight.
Yeah, right.
It's not good for your psyche or for your emotional stability, to have that kind of it's like a wound, it's like a sore in your psyche that's just festering. It's like a cancer.
Right.
And that's why we haven't gotten to Chris Colt yet, or not in detail.
We will be.
Well, but one of the reasons I wanted to learn about the gay life with Chris Colt was because I had not bias, but I had some thoughts that were negative because I didn't know that much about it. I wanted to learn about the life and find out, what I could. I wanted to be educated about it. And that's all you can do.
Right.
Larry Hamilton, I know he had character. Him taking the blame for our incident shows he's got character. It's like a mixed bag. I do know that I saw him, a couple guys waiting with knives down at the end on his way out to the car. He had a gun in his bag. He didn't even take it out. He just walked right up to them, and they scattered and backed away and looked like they were getting ready to run because he didn't show. And I asked him later, I said, didn't it make you nervous? Are you worried? He said, yeah, but he said, you can't let them see you're scared, Bob.
Right.
He said, and there were other heels that wouldn't go up there.
Seems to be quite the tool of the trade back then. You've learned that by quite a few guys by that point. You can't show you're scared.
No. You can't. If you do, you're asking to get beat.
Sure. Right.
You just say, yeah, come on and beat me up. You might as well pretend you're going to kill them. Make them think twice. If nothing else, I say, okay. If I was confronted, and I had it happen a couple times, if I was confronted by, 2 or 3 guys, I just say, okay. I said, all I can tell you is you're going to get hurt. You might do what you want with me, but one or all of you are going to get hurt bad. And I said, I got enough. I got enough. And that would be enough. And I meant it because I was scared.
You have to mean it.
I was scared. I said, I said, oh, yeah. You guys might be able to do what you want, but all of you are going to get hurt.
Well, I'll say this in regards to, this whole situation real quick, and then you can, if you got anything else you want to touch on here, please do.
Okay.
But in regards to Larry Hamilton, for those who aren't familiar with the name, he retired by somewhere around 1981. So he was already working into the latter half of his career, actually, by this point. I think he'd already been in the business close to 20 years by this time that you were working with him here, almost 20 years. I know he teamed up with his brother Jody a lot in the 50s, and get this, guys, he's not just some Southern heel. He actually main evented Madison Square Garden throughout the 50s. They sold out that place against Antonino Rocca and Miguel Perez. They were on top out there. And then after that, he goes and works and, sets it on fire in the Mid-Atlantic territory for Jim Crockett Sr. So he was definitely got around. He knew how to work the heel gimmick quite well by the time he ever got to here Florida with Bob Roop. And these stories you're telling and things like that. Now, in regards to what you were talking about with him and Homer Odell, that's nothing new. I just want to be clear for those who, again, don't know those names. This isn't something that Bob is creating out of his own mind. It's hearsay to him. He said he's heard these stories. These stories are out there. Jody Hamilton doesn't really come outright and say these terrible things about his brother in his book, but the stories are, the basis of it is there. But you see a lot of stories online, and specifically also about Homer Odell. So these are not secrets. They've been out there for decades. So I just wanted to be clear about that. I don't know anything by fact, but the stories are certainly out there.
Hey, I've made one trip with Bob Orton Sr. and like 3 other guys of his generation. I got stuck with them. Unbelievable. They talked about these conspiracies. This is what was said. The Jews are all going to uprise on a certain day. Or the blacks on a certain day, they're all going to pick up a gun and come and kill. Just the most unbelievably, incredibly stupid conspiracy theory stuff. And they believed it. Right. I can't believe they were, I was ignoring them, pretending I was brain dead.
Well, it sounds like they all found the right writing partners. So, outside of you.
Yeah. Well, those guys loved it. And they were all of them had guns in their bags, which I thought was kind of extreme. After I did the thing with Steve Kern's dad, but sure. I had a shotgun and a .357 Magnum. Right. I didn't carry the shotgun in my bag or on my, slung over my shoulder when I walked into an arena. I probably had the .357 in my bag, but again, by that time I'd had a gun or two pointed at me. So, but again, these guys had a very limited worldview. in order to believe, and I'm not trying to insult anybody here, but if you believe in conspiracies, well, at least do yourself the benefit of investigating. See if you can find out more information about what it is you've been told that's happening. And nowadays, all you need is your phone. If you're online and your phone, look it up. If you can read, you can find the information right there about what it is you've been told. That there's people killing children in a pizza basement, drinking their blood, or stuff like that. That's just utterly ridiculous. How could that possibly be happening? And there's no headlines. The people that are in the pizza basement drinking blood have been caught. I mean, if that was going on, that would be a headline about 12 inches high in a newspaper every day. Because, of course nothing like that's going on. But some people want to believe that it is. But the only way you can believe that is if you are willing to shut out information. And, information is strength. If knowing what's going on is a big help. And also, who wants to be afraid and unhappy and worried about, all these things happening? Life without that's difficult enough. You don't need all this stuff added onto it. So, all right, I'll get off my soapbox.
You're fine. So that was the curious case of the Missouri Mauler guys. We're going to roll on. We're going to touch on one more name here this week, Bob, before we close out the show. And that is by the latter half of the summer here in 1970. I saw a name pop up that was, I recalled the name. He didn't get over under this name, but there was a wrestler by the name of Joe Bednarski. And for those who don't know who that is, he would go on to become Polish Power, Ivan Putski, originally doing the kind of a knockoff of the Mighty Igor gimmick in some territories, but eventually he goes up to New York and he gets over there doing also, again, a different Ivan Koloff up there, but people know that one more commonplace than the Igor version that he kind of copied. But I saw this name and I had to go back and ask you. I asked you off air. I said, do you know a fellow by the name of Joe Bednarski? And you knew the name. You knew who that would go on to become. So I won't spoil anything else. If you got anything else you'd like to talk about right now in regards to Ivan Putski, let's share it with us, please.
Well, I mean, that was a very successful gimmick for him. And, my hat's off to him. I'm glad he did well with it. But, he didn't handle being successful very well because I found very few people that I ever talked to. First of all, his name doesn't come up because most of the guys are not looking for someone to knock. You talk about people you admire. You talk about guys that are getting over. And, we talked about Bobby Heenan, for example. You're looking for guys you can say good things about because who wants to be going around knocking people all the time? I mean, what a horrible attitude to have. You got all this nastiness in you. You got to get out by knocking people. No, Bednarski, the problem when you and I talked earlier, Ray, I talked about his habit of eating a lot of garlic and not bothering even like to clean his breath. His whole body reeked of garlic, but he wouldn't even use mouthwash or anything. So that when you had to wrestle him, he stunk, and that's very disrespectful. It'd be like, if you wore Depends and you had a full load in your pants and you went in the ring with it, you stink. You smell like shit, and. It's totally, if you did that, people go, what is your problem? What a disrespectful thing to do. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I had an incident where we had a fan in Tampa invite us to her apartment to have a couple of beers after a show and listen to some music, and very nice young lady, and there's 3 or 4 of us, and later on when we had all left, she came to me the next day and told me that she was missing $200 from her wallet. And the only person who had access to her money was Bednarski. So I made it up to the girl because I'm the one that brought him up there. And I asked him about it, and he denied it. So I'm not saying he did it, but I knew the girl well enough. I know she wasn't telling a lie. She was missing her money. So That's about the worst thing to me that a wrestler can do. If I'm not saying he did it, but if
Right.
so anybody did that, that's the worst thing you can do. Is like, because you make everybody look like a scumbag.
Right.
Those wrestlers. All you have to do is have one, and all of a sudden, all of you look like
I can see that.
2 cents waiting for change. It's so. No, I wasn't. And again, I told you earlier when Joe Benarski was asked to strike a wrestling pose, now a wrestling pose, not a bodybuilding pose, a wrestling pose. He stood up, flexed his biceps, and showed his biceps just like you would if you were posing for a bodybuilding contest. And I was young in the business. I'd only been around a year or two myself. I mean, it was in the program in Florida. Jerry Prater put it in the program. I thought, what kind of wrestling pose is that? If a guy's posing like that and he's a wrestler, I mean, he doesn't even have his arms in front of him. You can walk up and punch him right in the nose.
Well,
or take him.
Of course, that would become more commonplace with Superstar Graham and the guys like that as time went on there. But I get what you're saying. Strike a wrestling pose, and his background, I think he was a bodybuilder prior to the wrestling business. So I guess that to him, that was wrestling. We never saw Ivan Putski put on a clinic in the ring or anything like that. But that's kind of interesting. You got to work with him early on, before he was even given the Putski character.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't think I ever got. I don't remember ever getting in a ring with him. But I did. I beat him. But he was never. I mean, I never. You know what? I was never on a card with him as Putski, and I never no Japan trips. I never saw him again, frankly. And you know what? I don't mind.
You did team with him here against Ali Bey and Tito Copa in August of '70. So you got in the ring with him, maybe looks like. Ooh, I don't have the city down here. That's my fault. That's my fault.
Well,
but it's Florida, obviously. But I mean, I don't know where.
Was it Joe Benarski or was it?
No, Joe Benarski. Joe Benarski.
Okay.
Yeah.
So well, yeah, I don't remember that. I'm pretty sure I didn't ever mess with Putski. I think I remember that. But
right.
Yeah, again, I even that aside, the slovenly thing with Putski, that's a work. That's a work. That's what you do when you Frank Hickey doesn't go home and keep all that stuff in while he's sitting there.
At least we hope
cape, unless he's totally lost his mind. Keep his hat on, his cape, and all that while he's watching TV at night. I don't think so. So you have your ring appearance, you have your gimmick, and you have your personal life. When you're among your peers, you should show them respect. And a lot of guys that came from nothing to all of a sudden instant fame and fortune, like Putski did. Joe Benarski was nothing. Putski was really something. So to go in, say, a month's time from making $300 a week to making $2,000 a week, and then being able to keep it for do it for a number of years. Sometimes that small timers mentality is what you still have in your head, even though you've made it in the big time, because you didn't have to work your way up the ladder step by step. You just had, you got a lucky break, and you didn't ever grow into it. Joe Benarski might have been named himself Ivan Putski after that, but it was still little Joe there behind the tights.
Well, I've always heard Ivan referred to by his colleagues as a natural heel, and a lot of people have said, I don't know why they never turned him heel. Probably Ivan made so much money as a babyface, he knew never to turn heel. I think he could have pulled it off, though, from the stories I've heard about him. And I'm not saying, to the point where, it was thought perhaps by this young lady, the wrestling fan, that maybe it was him who took her money because he was the one that had the closest access to her purse at that time. I'm not talking about that kind of a heel. I just mean the ego, the character, the persona, the way he flashed himself, the way he talked to fans. I've heard a lot of stories of him working the New York territory at the TV tapings, and fans would ask for autographs and go up to him and try to speak to him. And he was rather rude with them. If he's working the gimmick, that's the one part he forgot to work, was the babyface part with his fans anyway, which is, unfortunate. But I thought it would be cool to get an insight as to Ivan Putski, how he was early on, if maybe he thought of himself higher than he actually was after he got over. But apparently it was to some degree maybe always that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. You never know what's going on in somebody else's head. But, yeah, if you get that, now that I've made it, I'm too good for you fans. what a ridiculous attitude that is. Who do you think, where did the money that went into your bank account, where did that come from?
Right.
It came from these fans you're giving a hard time here, that you're showing disrespect for. You're out of your mind. Yeah. Those are the people that are paying your bills, buddy. You better be nice to them. But, I didn't know Bednarski well enough to really form an educated opinion or one that has any detail to it. I just know that what I did know, I wasn't. And again, I'm not trying to talk down. He might have absolutely no. In fact, I'm sure he has absolutely no use for me. In fact, if you looked at his career, he probably made maybe 2 or 3 times the money I made in my career, because first of all, he worked a lot longer. But the amount of money made in a career is not that's not my evaluation or my symbol of success. How do you come out of it? How does the rest of your life go? How are you thought of? How do you think of yourself? Are you able to live with the things you did or didn't do? Was it worth it to shortchange your family and your friends, not have friends? While you're a wrestler, it's very difficult to have a personal life.
Right.
Was it okay to miss all your kids' birthdays and all that sort of thing? You have to add up the cost of what you had to pay to do it, and then try to figure if it was worth it. In a lot of cases, it wasn't, because guys didn't save their money. They didn't invest in anything that was going to, take care of them after they retired. So they gave it all up for nothing. But not everybody.
Well,
how are we doing on?
Well, I guess it's we can call it quits here this week, but we'll be back next week with a whole line of topics, including your first meeting of the legendary American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. The first time you met Dusty Rhodes, who maybe at that point wasn't even going by the name Dusty, perhaps. But it's going to be interesting to hear that at the top of the next show. We're going to talk about Bob Roop's first time encounter, or at least one of his early encounters with Dusty Rhodes. As later here, Bob, before you head off to Japan for your first tour of Japan, Dusty and Dick Murdoch, the Texas Outlaws, going to make their debut here in the Florida territory in 1970. Looking forward to discussing that just a little bit next time around, as well as, well, we can tell the Chris Colt stories next week as well. We'll fit those in. People have been waiting for those anyway. We've got a lot to talk about still as we continue on through 1970. We're going to talk a little bit more about Duke Yamuka, Hiro Matsuda, Jim Dalton. There's a name from the past as well. So that'll about do it this week, Bob, but I'm looking forward to next week. We have already got so much on the docket, so much on tap. It's going to be another fun episode, and we're not even there yet.
It's amazing, Ray, and I continue. I mean, I'm not brand new at this anymore, but it's amazing how quick the time goes when you're having a good time. And that leads right into what I always say, and I want to continue to say, is that without the listener out there, these stories have no relevance, because I can tell them all I want. I can write them in books and all that, but if you don't like to read or you don't buy books, then they won't be seen. The fact that you're willing to listen, you're out there now. I just want to repeat again, I really appreciate you doing that. It means the world to me, and thank you very much.
Alrighty, sounds good, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Roop, one more time, Bob. Happy New Year. Looking forward to another episode in 2 or 3 episodes from now, guys. We're going to get into some really interesting stuff. We're going to talk about Bob's first trip to Japan. I want to throw that out there as well. So much coming in the weeks here, heading into, we're in the new year now as we begin the new year. So can't wait to jump all around, talk all about these great topics, Bob, with you. And just once again, thank you so much here this week.
Well, thank you, Ray. It's been my pleasure. We've got a great tag team going here, my friend.
And all right, guys, that's going to wrap it up here this week for the Wrestling Stoop. I want to thank you again, Bob, for taking us along for the ride. Of course, you guys can friend Bob Roop over at facebook.com/poorBobRoop and follow me on X, formerly the Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, I am your co-host, Ray Russell, saying we'll see you again soon for another fun time out here on the Wrestling Stoop.